All right, welcome class to our week 5 presentation. I apologize for this being a little late in the week, but I think that it will apply to our discussion next week as well, because we are working toward the essay assignment, our very first essay assignment in the class. So this should help you get ready. So this is our week 5/week 6 presentation about writing the literary analysis. So of course, in terms of our assignment coming up, I'm asking you to compare and contrast at least 2 works that we have discussed so far in the class. And but why would we do that? So really it applies to, our overall look at literature as a whole, because when we analyze works, it broadens our understanding of the work itself and appreciation for that work. We can go deeper than just entertainment value. It allows us to look at the work from many perspectives and see the impact that it has. And that's really what we're looking at in terms of how it fits in with the time frame in which it was written. What kind of impact did these authors have, or how did the times impact them? So we really get a personal view of the life and times of this, what we would call our civil rights era that we've been focusing on in class, but being able to understand individual people, the way that they think, the way that they work, and their self-expression at the time can be valuable to our understanding of history and our understanding of the work itself. And of course, you can show off how smart you are anytime that Ernest Hemingway or Chinua Achebe are brought up into casual conversation, so that's always fun. But it definitely is beneficial in terms of understanding what is going on. So things to think about when you are trying to analyze a work. So we want to think about what themes, and that's one of the things our discussion this week in class is looking at, our themes, but what themes are trying to be conveyed, and what techniques is the author using to convey those themes. So mood, characterization, style, plot, point of view, all those things that we've talked about so far in the class. How are those techniques utilized by the authors? And that can then tell us what ideas lie beneath the text. So these are questions you can ask yourself. And what are the significance or importance do you as the reader find in the work? So do you think that the work is worth reading? Why is it worth reading? How does it connect to history? And so on and so forth. One of the things that you can really look at in terms of comparing these works is the purpose behind them. When writing a literary analysis, you can go beyond just the literary elements like metaphor and simile and that kind of stuff, but you can actually go beyond that and look at it from a particular point of view, or how these works apply to other issues and categories. So for instance, what we're trying to do is look at the historical perspective as we work in class. We could also look at politics or psychology. You can look at society as a whole. So all of these things, you can look at the literary elements and the piece of literature through many different lenses. So what we're trying to do in our paper is try to connect the purpose that the authors have, or connect the works themselves to each other. We're also trying to show how those applications relate to the life and times of the authors. So things to think about when you're looking at the purpose that the author might have would be, would be the theme that the authors are presenting, the conflict that is involved, and then the characterization, or the way that the author presents the characters. So theme, keep in mind that theme is an all-encompassing idea that the author is presenting in a work. And these are often themes that are universal, themes that happen in literature often, or throughout time, you could even say. So an example of a theme might be a coming of age. So coming of age is a very utilized theme, especially for young adult novels and things like that, where it has a character moving from childhood to adulthood. Or you could even have a coming of age idea moving from one stage in life to another stage in life, whether that is moving into old age or moving into adulthood, but you're moving from one stage to the next, and what kind of development as a person the characters have. That could be a theme. Love is a theme. Death is a theme. There's lots of themes that are out there, and overcoming could be a theme. So we're looking at themes, but you don't want to just analyze a theme by itself. You want to actually analyze it through and the ways in which the authors use different literary elements and techniques to present the theme. So this could be through the conflict, through symbolism, through diction and style, through point of view, figurative language, irony. So all of those elements that we've discussed in class so far can be analyzed in terms of presenting the theme of the work and showing how the author uses these elements to present the theme. Now let's kind of break it down. So one way that you could analyze a work is looking at the conflict, and this can bolster your idea about the theme or whatever the major purpose that you've come together with. When we're comparing and contrasting two different works, or more than two, we want to see how do they connect. So how do these works connect, and why do they do so? And of course, in a contrast, we're going to show how they're disconnected also. But you're looking at the purpose that the authors have, or the message that they're trying to send, if there's a message, or the themes that they're trying to present. And one of the ways that they do that is conflict. So you might see in, for instance, we've talked about Miss Brill as a story, and then we also have goodness, it is lost. We also have other stories that present that idea of generation gaps. So even in A Good Man is Hard to Find, we see three different generations presented. But we have an older generation that is really prevalent in several stories that we've read, for sure. Even in A Dead Man's Path by Akebe, we have these generation gaps. And this could be a conflict or a major connection that we have between the works. And then look at those conflicts and look how are they presented in the work. So is it an internal conflict? Miss Brill is a great example of an internal conflict for a story. There's not a whole lot of external conflict in that story. Obviously, we see that there are those, the younger kids that kind of make fun of her, and that's a human versus human conflict. But generally speaking, most of the conflict happens within herself. While we have, in a Dead Man's Path, we have several different kinds of conflicts. We have a human versus human in terms of the schoolmaster and the people of the village and how they interact with one another. But we also kind of have a human versus nature or human versus society kind of conflict going on there, because human versus nature, obviously we're looking at the path itself, but also society, because there is a conflict between that new line of thinking and an old traditional line of thinking, and how those two are combating one another. So if we look at stories and the conflicts that are within them, that could be a connection that you make between two works. Characters are definitely great ways to make connections. And this is how characterization is ultimately how an author reveals characters in the story. And they do that through the character's own thoughts, point of view, through the character's actions, what they say and dialogue, and through the thoughts of others. So depending on the perspective or the point of view of the work, of course, we're going to be able to see into what other people think, what other people are doing, and then our central character in the story what are they doing? What are they thinking? And how do those things interact? So you could even think of point of view as a way to compare and contrast works. If two different works are presented in a similar point of view, how does that affect the way that the story is presented? And also look at, the development of the characters. Is there an emotional development? Are there personality changes? Or how do the personalities connect to one another? How do they connect to the story's overall purpose and theme? And how do the characters connect to the setting itself? So characters interact with one another, and they also can interact with the overall story presentation, whether that's the setting or the personality or development within themselves. So when you're getting ready to write an essay, a literary analysis, you want to make sure that you are reading the pieces several times, not just once, and reading them carefully. So when you go through the reading process, make sure that you are a critical reader. We're not reading through for entertainment. And I think that you guys have already established this kind of idea because we've been asking questions about the different works throughout the semester. And so you have an understanding of having to look at a work for specific purposes. And one thing that you might want to do is actually note important passages. You could take a pencil and underline it in the book, or get a little sticky note or something like that, and help you remember where those important passages are. Think about the themes and purposes of the author's works, and what are the similarities between them, what other literary elements are used between the stories, and just collect information as you go until you have enough to develop your idea. And be sure when you present your paper, it's organized. So, for instance, if you're going to discuss how the main characters are revealed through dialogue, setting, and symbolism, then you would group those things. So you would write the paper with a section about dialogue, a section about setting, and a section about symbolism. Usually it would be maybe 2 paragraphs, or remember the paper only has to be 500 to 700 words. I'm okay if it goes over, but you don't want to go too crazy over. This is probably 500 to 700 words, is about 3 pages, I'd say, double space typed. And so if you spent in the body of your essay a paragraph talking about one story and the dialogue, and then another paragraph about the other story and the dialogue, 2 paragraphs, and then you go on to the next one. So compare and contrast essay can go like that. Or you can have one section that's just about one story, and you talk about dialogue, setting, and symbolism all in one story, and then the next section of your paper is all about the second story, dialogue, setting, symbolism. But the point would be that if those are the major issues that you're going to talk about in your paper, it needs to be organized in a clear, effective manner. So when you compare and contrast, the organization should reflect the main idea that you're presenting in your paper. And then, of course, you want to study the categories that you are deciding upon and look for relationships among them. So when you, especially looking at, if you decide to talk about dialogue, setting, you want to be able to make connections so that it makes sense. We're not just writing book reports here. We want to really analyze how an author uses these things to convey a meaning or purpose, and to connect to their historical time and place. So when you make those connections, we should also see why as a whole it should all come together. So if you are saying that, for instance, one of the things that we've really focused on are the modernist writers, and that is generally from 1920 to 1950. We've had a few outside of those time periods and outside of the idea of modernist, but as I mentioned in a previous presentation, modernist writers were trying to disconnect themselves from Victorian mindsets. The Victorian era in literature was very wrote. It was very stringent, and it would present a moral to the story almost always, and it was thought to be confining even, and related to a strict moral code, and that was kind of the idea of the Victorian era. And then modernist writers wanted to break from that, and so a lot of their writing is about breaking from tradition, breaking from previous generations, doing something new. And you see that over and over and over again in the stories that we've read so far. So perhaps if you have this idea that you're going to show how modernist writers have broken from Victorian ideas, you can do that by showing these two stories, or maybe even three if you're really wanting to do some extra work. But you want to be able to have that as our overlying theme. So if your overlying theme is modernist writers breaking from Victorian tradition, and you're going to talk about Miss Brill, and you're going to talk about A Dead Man's Path. So those are your two stories, and you're going to compare them. But the whole thing, depending on the type of elements that you are going to include, whether that's conflict or irony or point of view or society or setting. So the way that you connect those in your paper should also connect to that overlying theme. So in a compare and contrast, if you took those two elements, then you would look at maybe how the settings are a major part of the story, and the difference between Akebe's work and Miss Brill, and how setting was important, and then the idea of point of view, and whatever that is. But you need to make that connection clear throughout your overall main idea in your paper. So make sure these connections are clear and analyzed thoroughly, rather than listing off different, these are the similarities and these are the differences. Because, I mean, ultimately we could say a difference is that Akebe wrote from a perspective of people in Africa as opposed to Miss Brill, which is in the United States. And that's all well and good, but why? Why include that? What does that say? So if you're going to do that, and that's listing. If you want to dive deeper, you could talk about the difference between modernism in writing in Africa and modernism in America, and where people are in terms of what it means to break away from previous generations. So in Africa, during this time period, it didn't mean breaking from tradition. Tradition was to them, or at least in Akebe's words, were the tribal traditions that went before colonization. So they're hearkening back to that time before colonization, and so the break is really with those that colonized the country, rather than the break with their tribal traditions. So that's a difference between the break that we see in the United States, where Victorianism is steeped in the entire culture, and that's what they're breaking from in terms of older generations, not hearkening back to anything. They're trying to do something completely new. So that's the connection that we can make if you went to that idea of point of view and society. So we want to have an overall. Now when you start writing your paper, of course, one of the things that you want to work on is to make sure that you have a clear thesis statement. And that's kind of what I've been talking about, of having an overall purpose and idea, and then having clear organizational details in terms of what you're going to analyze in each work and how those connections are made. And that should be stated in a 1 to 2 sentence statement at the beginning of your paper. Generally speaking, it would be at the end of your first paragraph. Your thesis statement needs to include the title of the works. And I said 3 here, I apologize for that. It should be 2 or more. The title of the works that you are going to analyze, and the authors that connect to those titles. And then how are you going to compare them? So your thesis statement needs to present that. You're going to be sure to include a brief summary of the stories. Don't spend the entire time summarizing. You could do this. A summary could very easily be the introductory elements of your paper. Put that in the introduction. Keep in mind that your reader, myself, has read all these stories, and so I don't need a long drawn out summary of the story. Just a real quick recap of what these things are about, what their major elements are, and then in each body paragraph take a different approach to proving your thesis statement. So use concrete examples from the text. You could use direct quotations. Make sure you cite your sources. You can use paraphrases. You can use outside sources if you want to. If you want to go and look for source material outside of the textbook, and that's fine. You can use our discussion boards as long as you make sure that you cite your sources. You can cite a discussion board, and make sure you bring those stories, not just 3, but whatever 2 or more stories together with a clear conclusion paragraph. So just as a reminder, the assignment is to write an analysis where you analyze and compare and contrast 2 or more works of your choice from the works that we have read so far in class. You can also make sure that you keep in mind the time in which they were written, but you could also focus on characters, plot, historical context, literary elements, setting, any of those things, and that are highlighted in our textbook that we've gone over so far, diction, style, those kind of things. Your paper should be double-spaced, 12-point Times New Roman font. It needs to have a 1-inch margin and contain an MLA formatted title page. Keep in mind that the title page example is available on the announcements area of the class. Be sure that you save your file in the formats that I present here on the screen. I am not able to open Google Docs, so if you have written it in Google Docs, you need to download and save it on your computer in a different format. And you can do that right through Google Docs. It's not very difficult to do, but make sure that when you upload it to me, it's in one of these formats. And then you turn it in through the assignments and quizzes area of the course. In week 6, there will be a Dropbox available at that point. This is my works cited page for this presentation. I did want to quickly share the stories that you can choose from. So these are the stories we've read so far. A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. Sorry, I don't have all the authors written down, but Sonny's Blues, The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, Miss Brill, Sound of Thunder, Dead Men's Path, A Clean, Well-Lighted Place by Ernest Hemingway, Barn Burning by William Faulkner, Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut, and A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. You could also consider some different works that are in the book if you would like to do a little more reading. But Chrysanthemums by John Steinbeck is great. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, that may be something that several of you are familiar with. A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So those are some stories that are extra in the short story sections of our textbook that we have not had a chance to really dive into and discuss. But they are available if you would like to look at those. But if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to send them my way. And otherwise, we will see you in the discussion board for week 5 and week 6. So have a wonderful time. Bye.